Okay. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us on behalf of the American Geophysical Union's Natural Hazards Early Career and Student Committee. Welcome. My name is Nicole Jackson, and I'm here along with Sophia Sang, and we are representatives on the committee. And we're here today to talk to you about the intersection of outreach and education on the natural hazards community. And so with us today, we have Gina Roberti and Tiff Cousins. And so we'll do this as a question and answer format. And to start off, I'd like for each of you to introduce yourselves and provide a little bit of background, who you are and how you obtained your role. So we'll start with Tiff.
Hi, thank you. So I'm Tiff Cousins. I'm a PhD student in the Urban Affairs Department at Virginia Tech. I'm also a GIS and research analyst at the New York State Governor's Office of Storm Recovery and a Bill Anderson Fund. My background is an undergrad in a double major in geosciences and geography. And then I got my master's in urban planning. And now currently, as I said, PhD student, full title is Planning, Governance, and Globalization in the Urban Affairs and Planning Department. So how I got into this is Hurricane Sandy. I'm from New York City. And when Hurricane Sandy came through, a lot of the news outlets was, commenting on the flooding in certain areas. And I thought, it's something that we face every day. How is this not known to you guys? So I got into disasters that way.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. And Gina, would you like to introduce yourself and share a little bit of your background with us?
Great. Hi, everyone. My name is Gina, and I studied geology as an undergraduate, and then I pursued my graduate degree in education, specifically outdoor education. So I work currently at the volcano, Mount St. Helens, and I work as an educator teaching about hazards, volcanic hazards primarily, and other natural hazards, such as forest fires that create large disturbances like volcanoes do. And my training in geology really informs the work that I do as an educator. We work with sometimes like young elementary folks, and sometimes we get college level classes that come. And before Mount St. Helens, I worked at other similar places that were tied to national parks doing geology outreach and education. So it's been a fun career path. It means that I mainly live in remote places and don't live in cities and get to be outside in the natural world quite a bit.
That sounds really fun. So the next question is, how do you use natural hazards research in your role? And we'll start with Gina on this one.
Okay, how do I use natural hazards research in my role? So primarily, I work with people who are visiting Mount St. Helens. Most of these people come from communities that are close to the volcano. So communities where perhaps their parents or grandparents experienced the large eruption that happened most recently in 1980. But for young people, there's not a lot of context. Many of the folks who I work with were not alive when that volcano erupted and are not aware of that. And so there's less of a visceral, tangible memory of ash falling in their communities or other types of products like the river being backed up from the sediment coming down. And so a lot of what I do is I try to engage young people by making the science really exciting. And we actually bring in a lot of scientists who are actively working, studying hazards at Mount St. Helens. So a lot of my job is coordinating, understanding what type of science happens at the volcano, and then coordinating and drawing in some of these people to serve as guest presenters or provide a little bit more context if I'm like leading a trip. And we try to engage people with this angle of the science is relevant, the science is happening. And the most common question that I get from young people is, when is the mountain going to erupt again? Many people want to know these questions, like when are volcanoes going to erupt? How are they going to affect us in the future? And often I respond that the field needs more people in it to study these questions, because today we can't predict when volcanoes will erupt. We can just understand the types of hazards that are possible in a given place. And so that's a lot of the work that I do, is trying to connect the present day status of where's the science at to people who are living in these hazard zones and the questions that they have, which are simply, how is this hazard going to affect me and when? So it's a fun and engaging job.
And it sounds like it's never ending. And Tiff, how do you use research in your realm and apply it?
Yes, for me, so it's on one end, because I'm a PhD student, I have to do research. So my dissertation looks at participatory methods in mapping localized flooding that's not quite captured in FEMA's flood maps. And so partnering with high school students in the community, like, let's go out and map these flooded areas. So that's one aspect. And then the other aspect is at work. We are using funds to, primarily what I do is research, did our interventions post Sandy, post Tropical Storm Lee, and Hurricane Irene, did our interventions in terms of resilience do a good job? Like, are we doing good? If Sandy were to come back again, like, are we better off than we were pre-Sandy? So that's how I use natural hazards research.
Great. And so it sounds like both of you are kind of interacting with different age groups. And so the next question is, how do you translate what you're seeing from the research space into accessible language or different types of visualizations or different streams of communication, because you're working with children and young adults? So I think we started last round with Gina, so we'll start with Tiff.
Not currently do I do this, but I have been thinking about the whole realm of science communication. Being a millennial, of course you love social media. So thinking about how to, create infographics to put out there. Because, the common quote is, a picture is worth 1,000 words. So how do we capture what we're trying to say visually? So yes, like, one of the methods that I would think about in the future is social media. How do we get information out there in a visually appealing way?
And Gina, what's your experience like on making that translation from the research realm to the folks you typically work with and interact with?
So it's a great question. One main piece of research that's really active in volcano land is generating hazard maps, which outline different phenomena that can occur when a volcano erupts, and like how these processes can affect communities of people that live nearby. And some of these processes include the things that people might expect when they think of a volcano erupting. So ash going into the air, where the tephra or ash may land, but other processes such as sediment that comes down in debris avalanches, or like large scale debris flows or lahars from volcanoes, are less known about by the public. And so these phenomena are also mapped in hazard maps. And so a lot of active research is improving the like getting into detailing out the hazard maps on more and more of a fine scale. But what we do to engage folks, for example, with elementary and middle school students, we actually have this activity where we have students create their own imaginary community. And it's very similar, the layout is very similar to Mount St. Helens. There's a volcano and there's some coastline and there's some rivers draining the mountain. And they create this whole community, and they learn that the mountain in the center of their map is a volcano. And then they actually receive, we have these clear transparent films, and we overlay the hazard map. So we say that some scientists came in and shared with them the hazard map that was most recent, showing some of these hazards. So where lahars or debris flows would flow, where ash or tephra would fall, where lava would flow. And they have to redraw their community based on the overlay of these hazards. And it's really fun. A lot of magic and creativity comes into play very quickly. But it's a fun way to take a concept that's really important. Like hazard maps are one of the key pieces of like material that scientists are producing for the public and for emergency managers and communities to deal with these natural hazards. And so to actually engage on the scale of designing and then changing one's design based on what the hazard map is saying, and then maybe we give them another hazard map, it's really fun and engaging. So that's an example of one piece of contemporary science that we're like always working with and excited to share. And I would say the majority of people that I share volcanic hazard maps with, whether it's a map of Mount St. Helens or Mount Rainier, if people are from Seattle, like many people, even though these maps are published on, you know, state geologic websites and published on the USGS social media, like the majority of the public is not familiar with these maps or necessarily have seen these maps before. So there's a lot of like baseline science education that happens there.
That activity sounds like a lot of fun.
It's a little crazy.
I'm just seeing paint everywhere. So it sounds like both of you have found a lot of great research that you're able to bring into your different spaces. But are there any particular gaps that you've found along the ways where there might be areas of improvement that could help either through better science communication on your end or just different types of information that you kind of wish you had? And so we'll start with Gina on this one.
Oh, it's a good question. I would say for volcanic hazards and monitoring, there is the research that's occurring right now with tomography or the imaging of the beneath the crustal surface, the imaging that's happening so people can understand better why we have volcanoes where they are. Like, why does the magma come up in this place is often tied to the bedrock and the structure and where we have like pre-existing faults or sutures between different terrains, for example. And all of that is more complicated recent geologic science that's happening. And so at Mount St. Helens, there was a big project called IMUSH, Imaging Magma Under Mount St. Helens. It's a really darling acronym in my mind. And the USGS, for example, has a webpage about the IMUSH project, but it's it's hard to communicate the nuances of that project. And primarily what's come out from that project are a couple of papers, and the papers aren't quite published and the figures aren't quite available. And so as an educator, I like to be able to tell people what's happening. So I often talk about this project and how scientists can learn more with this higher resolution seismic imaging beneath the surface to understand, why is the magma coming out of Mount St. Helens versus neighboring volcanoes in this area versus another place where the vent could be located, et cetera. But the science moves really slowly. So the process of scientific publication is slow, the peer review process is slow. And that's just one element to work with as a science communicator. Like, you want to excite people and get them, I want to make people feel excited to support science, especially publicly funded science, like hazards research that is happening. And it's hard to do when there's not products that are available, even if the research is happening over like a 10 to 15 year period. So I'm excited to know about some of these things. And I feel like I have this privy of information that's not quite available to the public. Sure.
Yeah, that's tough when there's a huge lag between the two. So, and Tiff, what's your experience been in terms of challenges in your domain?
I would say involving youth. I feel like a lot of the times when we talk about, participatory things, it's usually adults, because of course, it's their home, they're the ones paying the mortgage and such. But also, growing up, you would want to sort of be involved in these conversations, or at least hear these conversations. Because my mind would think, like, especially in high school, you take your usual chem, bio, and for us, we had social studies, which kind of lumped history and geography and anthropology and all that stuff together. So it'd be really cool, like at a high school level, to get a class on just hazards or something of that relation. Because as specifically for me, I didn't know the hazards community existed until like my last semester of senior year in undergrad. And it's just like, oh, if I had really known, maybe I would have done something a little bit different. I would have probably still done geosciences because my focus was just strictly earthquakes. But then I got open to like, oh, there's all these other hazards people research. So I would love to see a lot of more of that, like science communication, but specifically targeted towards like high school or even younger. If you want to teach the 5-year-olds about hazards, that'd be pretty cool.
Great. So Gina, it sounds like you're primarily working in volcanoes, and Tiff, you've done a lot of work with storms and flooding. What do you do to actually bring in some of the information from other types of hazards that are taking place in terms of either data or different research products that are available specific to those hazards that could be ported over, or just how things are communicated about them that might be a best practice for your area? So any thoughts that you may have on that one? And I think we'll go with Tiff to start this one.
The first thing that comes to mind is interdisciplinary work. So at Virginia Tech, there's the Disaster Resilience and Risk Management graduate program. It's a like interdisciplinary program where you have geosciences, urban planners, civil engineers, business, BIT specialists coming together to form this interdisciplinary space where we talk about disaster resilience, but from each department's perspective. And so with that, it really gives way to conversation on even like what does a model. We had a whole discussion on like what does a model mean, because it may mean something different from a volcanist to an urban planner to a seismologist. So in that, trying to communicate with one another what your research is in a way that other disciplines will understand, and they can then communicate that to someone else. Did that answer your question? Sorry.
Yes. Yes. And Gina, your thoughts?
Well, I'd like to echo the interdisciplinary piece. I feel like that is one way that we in the science community can draw people into our, like, I would say, nerdy bubble of enthusiasm. Like, I live in a nerdy bubble surrounding volcanoes and volcanic hazards and communicating those hazards to the public. And the education that we do, there's always a push to try to draw people in. And so whether they're middle school students or high school students who are on their phones, like, how do you draw people in and get the buy-in to join the conversation? And a lot of the techniques that we use structure around like just hosting debates or discussions and really parsing out stakeholders and role plays and the imagination that comes with, like, okay, maybe we're building this imaginary community, and then what happens if this hazard does come through, or how can we build resilience by planning ahead of a natural hazard if we know the scope and scale of something that could happen. So when, the biggest thing, or I'd say that at Mount St. Helens, the largest long-term economic result of the big eruption in 1980 was this sediment, all of the debris from the volcano essentially falling apart. So we had the volcano exploded and also collapsed, and all that material had to go somewhere. And of course, it's coming down the river drainages. And that has a huge economic impact. The rivers that drain from Mount St. Helens lead into some of the major rivers in the West, including the Columbia River, which are huge for shipping things like our iPhones and everything that we get on shipping containers. And so there's some systems thinking about long-term effects of, okay, an eruption causing sediment to move, causing ships to be stalled for days, for example, and all of the economic implications of that, and then the cost of like digging out the riverbed to opening up the shipping passage again. So we do like a debate activity, a discussion activity, and a role play to try to engage students with the diversity of stakeholders who are involved in community awareness of hazards, and then mitigation, and then also management. So this is a long-term hazard that began at this one point in time and is going to continue. And so yeah, there's a lot, we're still developing some of these activities, and we don't work as much with high school students as we do with elementary and middle school students. But I think there's a lot there to draw in these interdisciplinary pieces just to increase the engagement with the problem.
Great. And we have time for one final question. It might be the most difficult question of all today. What advice would you give to someone who's interested in blending hazards work, related work, and education and outreach? So Tiff, we'll start with you.
I would say patience. It takes time, especially in my realm of urban planning, participatory planning. You're working with other people, they're people, they have their own lives. And so one of the big things is this will engaging outreach will take time. So have patience is what I would say.
And Gina, what would you tell someone who's interested in having fun in the space?
Well, I would say that anything that we do in this world, to me, comes down to relationship. And working in natural hazards, whether one is doing the computer modeling or producing infographics for an emergency planning committee, or working as an educator for elementary school students, and we're doing shake alert drills or whatever type of drills for hazards that are regional in our area, there's a level, like there needs to be work in relationship building with the different stakeholders in any type of community to build trust. And, if I'm creating an infographic, I need to have some like trust in the people that are receiving that for them to want to share it and spread it and read it. And I think that there's an increasing awareness in the scientific community about the need to build trust with diverse stakeholders. And I'm really excited. I'm excited for the increased attention to like equity and inclusion in our field. So thinking about, okay, I'm doing this incredible work studying the details of the seismology and the details of the tomography underneath Mount St. Helens. I want to know why magma is coming up where it's coming up in this vent area, why that's so exciting. And what is my role connected to all the other people who live by this volcano, who have been affected by this volcano, who will be affected by this volcano in the future? And like, what is my role in building relationship with the stakeholders here so that the work that I'm doing can make a positive difference in the future. So I love hazards work. I think it takes the why question. People always ask, like, well, why do we care about this? Why am I saying this? Why am I coming to this mountain? And it's just really relevant because you're coming to this mountain because this is a mountain that explodes, it falls apart, it creates all the sediment, it creates ash. The ash goes all the way across the country or all the way around the world. It's like, this is one place on the earth that affects a lot of people. And so the hazards, geologic hazards, help bring the why in for many people who might not be interested necessarily because it's like a cool natural science phenomenon, but because it really affects people. So it's been really fun to work in this field. And I would encourage people and remind people that in academia, there's more than just academia and government scientist jobs to make a difference in earth science hazards. I work for a community nonprofit. Part of my salary comes from an Indian tribe. Part of my salary comes from the federal government through the US Forest Service. And part of my salary comes from schools that pay to come visit and learn about these hazards. So there's many ways to work in this field of science communication and education and outreach. And one doesn't have to be limited to the what's been modeled throughout academia, which are jobs in academia. So
it's a great point to end on. So we have a few takeaways from our time, and I really appreciate both Gina and Tiff joining Sophia and I to share their experiences in hazards related outreach, their enthusiasm and passion for the field. It certainly made me excited to be part of the field as well. And so some takeaways that we've identified are giving progress updates to local science educators and communicators so that they don't have to wait on the research community to kind of get stuff out the door. There needs to be a better bridge on and kind of facilitating that discussion. And the interdisciplinary nature of our work, it's not very siloed, it's very siloed, and it really shouldn't be, because it affects a lot of different dimensions, both in terms of the physical space and then and the actual just human space and relationship building. So, and echoing Tiffany's one takeaway of patience, so much patience working in this space. So once again, thank you both for taking time out of your schedules to join us. And I hope our viewers and listeners out there have learned as much as we've learned from you for these last few minutes. Thank you.
Thank you.
thank you.